Hello and welcome to another episode of Property-Pxrn Stars, the premium property podcast, brought to you by your hosts David Lindley.
And I'm Nat Giggs.
And today our guest, our star, is none other than Steve Carroll, who has come all the way over from Australia specifically
just to do this.
Just to do this. Can you believe it? What a good guy.
That's commitment.
Absolutely.
So for those of you who are not familiar with Steve's name, Steve is, well, he's quite a few things and has been quite a few things as well. Top tier leadership in the REA group in Australia, as well as working in News Corp, having hundreds of team members underneath him as well. Been a speaker at AREC, and then probably a name that lots of people from the UK industry would understand as well. Been endorsed by the likes of Tom Panos as well. So bit of a big hitter we're blessed with on the podcast today. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, great being here. Great being here.
And you are, I think you got an Aussie accent.
Yeah, you have got an
but
Aussie
you're actually
accent.
not Australian. You are originally British, right?
Yeah, originally British, moved over to Australia in 2006. So sponsored by News Corp. So News Corp were keen for me to go and help them out with their property advertising that was in abundance in newspapers, and they knew that it was all going to shift online, and that was my area of expertise. So they flew me, the family, out in 2006. We were supposed to come back in 2010, but we're still there, and it's now 24.
Yeah, wow. And so, and that's quite interesting. So you kind of oversaw that transition from print media to portals, or was it digital advertising for properties? What did that look? What was that transition?
Yeah, so I worked for a big publishing company called EMAP, which were at the time, this is the around 2000, 2001, which they were one of the biggest publishing companies in Europe. So in most towns in the UK, the newspaper would belong to EMAP, and obviously every single week, or if it was a daily newspaper, you'd have a section which was packed with job ads, packed with motoring ads, and packed with real estate ads. And we knew back in 2001 that at some point that was going to migrate into online. We're not sure what it looked like, but we knew it was going to move. So my job here in the UK back in the early 2000s was to figure out how that might happen, and the whole change management process internally, but also externally, because we obviously had to speak to real estate agents and say, this thing that you've been so used to for decades called print, well, by the time we get to 2010, which seemed ages away, it was going to disappear. And so between about 2000 and 2005, that's really where I was focused. And then eventually, of course, it all moved online. There was never a question as to whether or not it was going to go. It was, how will it go, and how do you manage that process so you don't lose a lot of money as it moves across. And then News Corp. So the Australian real estate industry, or the Australian newspapers, were behind where behind where the UK was. So in 2006, Rupert Murdoch's newspapers in Australia still had a wad of property ads, a wad of job ads, motoring ads, and they saw my expertise as someone who could help them guide that across. So that's why I moved to Australia.
This might be quite a detailed question to start with so early, but then where did that end up, and what does the portal industry look like in Australia? Because it's a big topic of contention here with UK agents, but what is it like for Australian agents? What does the portal scene look like over there, and what's the differences between the two?
Yeah, so I think, look, realestate.com.au, which is owned by REA, 60, so REA is 67% owned by the Murdoch family or News Corp. The synergy with realestate.com.au and Rightmove is very, very similar. So I know, because I was sales director at realestate.com.au for 10 years, I know there's a lot of discussions between Rightmove and realestate.com.au on what's working, what's not working, how are consumers behaving. And so they swap lots of ideas. So the angst towards Rightmove and the angst towards realestate.com.au is similar.
Okay.
Is similar.
Good to know we're not.
And would you say that Rightmove are leading that, like the print version going back into the early 2000s, so they're slightly ahead on their findings? Or is it now, because of the World Wide Web, if you like, it's quite level now in terms of what they're sharing with each other? And
well, I think if I mean, let's talk soccer, football for a second,
Yeah.
right? So if realestate.com.au and Rightmove are in the Champions League, so they're in the top tier, I would say that there's certain things that realestate.com.au do better than Rightmove, and there's certain things that Rightmove do better than realestate.com.au. And I mean, interestingly, you've got Zoopla, and in Australia you've got Domain. And then you've got a third player which is
On the market.
on the market,
yeah.
and in Australia you've got a third player which is called Homely, yeah. So it's very, very, very similar. And so as I've been speaking to UK agents and business leaders here over the last couple of months, which is how long I've been back in the UK, I hear very, very similar stories.
Charging model's the same, monthly subscription.
More expensive in Australia.
Yeah, it is,
So when I joined in 2010, so what happened was I came over in 2006, as I said, to help predominantly manage that print migration online. And my job was done in around about 2009. So what we needed to do, we had done, and in some areas we'd failed, in some areas we'd been successful. So in 2009, 2010, we as a family were actually coming back to Stamford, and then News Corp said, well, look, we've got this beast of a portal called realestate.com.au. Will you come over and help us scale that to wherever it might be able to go? So just to give you an idea, back in 2010, the average price of an ad on realestate.com.au would have been about $80, which would have been about £50, right? Today, the average price of an ad on realestate.com.au would be about $2,300. So that would be about £1,500.
That is different. So, and that was, I had somewhere in the back of my mind thinking that, because I had a long time ago worked with some Australian agents, but it's done on a per property basis, isn't it? Whereas by and large, from Rightmove over here, it's just you pay your subs and you stick as many houses on as you want. But that's different with realestate.com.au.
So realestate.com.au was like that. It was very much a subscription model back in 2010. But then it flipped to a model where you paid a minimal entry fee to be part of realestate.com.au, and then you paid per property. So the more houses you advertise.
When did that transition take place?
Oh, that changed around 2010, 2011, 2012.
And what was that like as a transition?
Well, it was a fabulous move at the time by the organisation, because, of course, one of the big differences between the markets is the advertising is paid by the seller in most cases. So if I was an agent and I'm speaking to a seller who wants to sell their property, the seller needs to understand there's two fees. There's the fee for that you pay the agent, that 2% commission or whatever the commission might be, and then you pay for the marketing. And so the marketing's not paid for by the agent, it's paid by the seller. Yeah. Now, one of the real good things about that is, as soon as your ad goes on to realestate.com.au, the seller has got skin in the game, because if the property doesn't sell, then they've wasted their money on advertising on realestate.com.au.
I was going to ask two questions. Firstly, is a specific one, get my teeth in, is if they then can't sell it, they relist another agent, do they have to pay that upfront marketing again?
So depending on what offer is on at the time, by realestate.com.au. So worst case scenario is the property is listed with agent A and the seller pays the marketing to run for 4 or 5 weeks. The property doesn't sell after 60 days. The seller decides to switch agents. Then worst case scenario is the seller would have to pay all the marketing again. But realestate.com.au might have an offer on the table which says, hey, look, if it's a re-advertised property, the seller only has to pay half the price. I can tell you one thing, it won't be for free.
So you don't see many sellers switching agents?
Well, to be honest with you, one of the surprising differences between the UK market and the Australian market is the number of properties that don't sell is quite low in Australia. So for every 100 properties that come on the market, my guess would be 90 plus of those 100 properties get sold.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the UK, the percentage of properties that don't get sold is a lot higher. Yeah.
So our focus on this podcast and everything is predominantly, not completely, but predominantly on the premium end of the property market.
Yep.
And I think in that sense in the UK, we are getting towards that stage where vendors are paying, as they do in Australia, so upfront marketing contributions and then a fee. I think namely because there is so much more marketing investment that goes on for that property at a premium price point.
Yep.
In Australia, they pay regardless of price point all the way up and down the market. They pay that upfront fee as well.
That's right. Yeah. So the way that pricing is done on realestate.com.au is by area of where the property is listed. So if it's a very affluent area of Sydney, then the price of an ad is going to be more expensive than a less affluent area of Sydney. So you're still buying the same size ad, you still get the same size picture and the same number of words and what have you. You're just penalised, if that's the right word, for having a property in an expensive suburb within Sydney.
I see.
Irrespective of whether or not it's a $15 million mansion looking over the Harbour Bridge or whether or not it's an apartment.
Okay.
Doesn't change because of the size of the property. It's where the property is actually positioned.
I was just going to ask how you've seen that change the dynamics of the industry, that different charging mechanism, because I think it seems like a small thing, but actually could be quite a big thing. And you talked about how sellers are stickier with their agents, they sell more. Are there any other ways that changes the dynamics of the way the property industry works in Australia compared to what we're used to in the UK?
Yeah, I think one of the luxuries that agents have in Australia is the marketing. A lot of the marketing, whether or not it's the ad on realestate.com.au or the ad on domain or the signboard. And I mean, signboards in Australia are bloody huge. Yeah. And a lot of them carry the face of the agent, and they'll have the agent's mobile, all his or her details. So it's like the seller of the property is paying for the marketing of the agent. Yeah. And so what I have noticed, my view is there's a lot that the Australians can learn from the Brits in the context of real estate. And there's a lot the Brits can learn from the Australians. One of the things that I think the Australians do well, individual agents market themselves really, really well. Now, one can argue they can afford to do that because in effect, it's not coming directly out of their own pocket. It's being funded by the seller, if that makes sense. And so what you got to remember in Australia is if a consumer decides to sell their house, they choose an agent. They don't choose an office to sell their house. So I choose you, David, right? I expect you to be my point of contact through the duration of the sale. Now I choose you because I've heard good things about you. I've seen your marketing and I've seen your Google reviews. I've seen other things that you personally have done. The fact that you work for LJ Hooker or Ray White is secondary to me. I've chosen you to market my property. So in Australia, the 50,000 agents that we have over there, the importance of looking amazingly good online and offline is really, really key.
I think we're again slightly heading towards that direction as well. Whereas more traditional setup in the UK, you have your valuer and then somebody else that would take it on after that. But it is beginning to change. Whereas that individual taking it from cradle to grave, from market appraisal through to completion, especially in the premium end of the market, that's I think what sellers are after more. So it's interesting it's going in the same direction as well.
I mean, I'm thinking agents would have listened to the first part of this conversation thinking, when are our fees going to look the same as the Australian model?
What are Australian fees?
For the Rightmove subscription compared to real estate agent.
Don't hold your breath.
Well, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because obviously there's a load of talk about how that significantly increased the subscriptions for Rightmove. And there's an element where I think part of our conversation when we got together was talk about how well do agents actually use the tools. Let's call them tools. There's loads of tools. And I think you used actually a really good analogy about being in the gym.
Yeah.
Share that with me and share that with the audience.
Well, I mean, look, I spent 10 years having tough conversations with agents and agencies, as you can imagine. And one of the things I used to say to agents and agencies, look, imagine imagine a gymnasium. So you join a gym, and a gym is really expensive if you only use 10% or 15% of the equipment. And if you only go once a week, and if you only go to a class once a month, it's expensive. But if you go to a class every single day of the week, if you understand how all the equipment works and so on and so forth, you get the story. The subscription becomes a better value for money. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time on with the account managers who work for me was educating offices and educating agents to use all of the tools that came with the subscription. Yeah. And sometimes that was hard because agents are busy and agents don't want to sit down and learn how to use this tool or learn how to use that tool. But what I noticed was the very, very successful agents in Australia do a number of things really, really well. And one of the things that they do well is they take on the chin the cost of the advertising on realestate.com.au, because they're never going to change it. They can whinge and moan as much as they want, but it's going to be the price. So what they do is they really work hard at using and understanding all the tools. They get the account managers to come in once a month for the sales meeting and update them on any data that realestate.com.au has. That's going to help the agent look as though he or she knows what they're talking about when they're listing the property. And so that was really, really important. And I think what REA's pricing has done as well is it's forced agents to look at not an alternative to realestate.com, but it's forced them to understand how Facebook ads work, how ads on other social media platforms work, how building a reputation in the community can look like. And so what I mean by that is
improved the personal marketing.
Yeah, so let's go to an extreme. So let's just say that one day realestate.com.au closed its doors. It just closed its doors, yeah? Then what I've noticed is the good agents have got an alternative way to find buyers, to look for sellers, and so on and so forth. And I think that behavior has been driven by the fact that REA have been putting their prices up. And although realestate.com.au is always going to be on the marketing shopping list, so will these other things that also attract sellers and buyers into the ecosystem.
Yeah. Interesting.
So actually, I'll ask the next question in a second. Just coming back to something you said about fees, and I got the wrong end of the stick.
No, it's on the subject, isn't it?
What are typical Australian agents' commission fees?
Our commission fees, I would say 2% to up to 3%. What you've got to remember, though, of course, is the deductions out of that commission don't include the marketing, because we've just talked about that. It's paid for by the seller. And because the average days on market for a property, I mean, it goes up and down, but on average would be about 35 days, 35, possibly 40 days on average. So the agent gets paid a lot faster than they might do here in Australia, where the days on market can obviously blow out to months and months and months.
And why do you think those fees are higher? Is it just cultural? Is that what's happened for so long? Because over here we've had a bit of a race to the bottom in terms of fees, and they've sunk around to about the 1% mark and stayed there. I know if you listen to Chris Watkin, he's measured this over best part of a decade and just seen, I think overall, I think I'm right in saying, a gradual decline in fees, where I think the average was about 1.6 if you go back 10 or something years, down to about 1.1 was the latest bit of research from Simon Ledbetter. So why are they different in Australia then? Especially because the vendor's paying again with the marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't compare. I can't obviously comment on the UK market because I'm not close enough to it. What I would say in Australia, that the industry has a plethora of good trainers. So people like Josh Fegan, Tom Panos, Michael Sheargold, Lee Woodward. I mean, the list goes on, and agents agents see selling real estate in Australia as a profession, as a real career. So they invest in themselves. They pay money to go to conferences and to learn. And so I think that in Australia, the focus on improving and getting your scripts and dialogues sounding really good is a real priority. Now that might be the same in the UK. I don't know, and it would be naive of me to try and comment, but that's why. Now, just to manage to manage expectations, the equivalent of a Chris Watkin in Australia would also say, in the olden days, commissions were higher than they are now, and there has been a decline. So I don't think your decline is different to what we've seen with what we've seen in Australia. It's probably the decline has been a lot slower, and so that's why even the average agents are getting commission that begins with 2.1, 2.2, or whatever.
Yeah. Whereas here it's the exceptional agents that do that, I think. And you might have just answered another question I have, because I often think to myself, I'll go to a conference and it'll be an Aussie lineup. You'll have your Josh Vegans, Josh Tesselin, Lisa Novak. And it's an Aussie themed, unintentionally, conference. And maybe that's answered the question, because there is such a focus on training over there that there are more trainers, more estate agency coaches, and therefore we import them. You said earlier there's a lot that the UK can learn from Australia and Australia learn from the UK, but that seems to be pretty one-way traffic in terms of, if you go to a conference and listen to who's speaking, they've certainly got a particular accent.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, all those people that you mentioned, I know, and I know Lisa Novak particularly well. In fact, I had Lisa's family and my family. We spent New Year's Eve together in New York, and I know Lisa's journey very, very well. But it's interesting because I was in one of the meetings that I've had since I've been over here, and one of the reasons I'm over in the UK is to broaden my knowledge of international real estate. So it's a pretty competitive industry, the consulting industry, which is what I'm in now. And so by spending time here and by meeting people like yourself and meeting other top agents and top leaders, it just gives me another point of difference and uniqueness that I can take back to Australia. So when I'm at this conference that we were talking about in 6 or 7 weeks, I can say to the audience of 200, hey, I've spent the last 3 or 4 months hanging around with some really smart people in the UK. I'm going to share with you some of the best stuff that I've heard. So that gives you a bit of context as to why I'm here. But I caught up with the CEO of EXP. You'll have to... Adam. Yeah. And Adam was saying to me that, often in the UK, training is seen as punishment. And I couldn't get my head around that. And he explained to me, Adam, if somebody is sent on training, it's a bit like going to the naughty corner where you haven't done a good job, so you're going on training. The mindset is totally different in Australia. Yeah. Now, I do want to make the point, there's a lot of stuff that happens in Australia that I think the UK does better. So I don't want to come over...
we can broaden on that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't want to come over as one of these people that comes from Australia and says that everything we do, and of course I'm British, but everything they do in Australia is the bee's knees, because it's not. And there's a lot of poor agents in Australia. There's a lot of average agents in Australia. Not everybody's like Lisa Novak.
Well, let's dive into that, because you've had several meetings around the UK in the last couple of months, and you've met various different leaders. Alongside those observations of the differences and the strengths of UK, what can you share with us that you've seen so far?
So what I've really enjoyed listening to in the UK is the number of conversations around artificial intelligence and technology, and how AI and technology can create efficiency, can create better customer service. So I've really enjoyed speaking to, and bear in mind, I've kind of deliberately chosen or asked to see successful real estate leaders and businesses, including yourself, of course. And so it's probably because I'm talking to the top end of town, I'm hearing conversations around that. But that's been impressive. And so one of the messages that I'm going to take back to Australia is, when I talk to the top agents, the top business leaders in the UK, the topic of AI seems to be very prevalent if it's not on your radar back in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne, maybe you're a little bit
behind the curve.
Behind the curve. And so Ian Preston,
Yeah.
you know, I caught up with him. I heard him speak at a conference up at Ellen Road, Leeds United's football ground. And, you know, he's really curious and inquisitive about the advantages that AI can bring. And so that's been one of the big takeaways. The other big takeaway is I think Australia real estate agents have it a bit lucky in that we don't have the external factors that the UK has. So, you know, in the UK, obviously, apart from Melbourne, I'll take Melbourne out of it, we weren't really impacted as much by COVID as you were in Europe. We didn't in Australia have to deal with Brexit. We didn't or don't have to deal with a war in Russia. Now, just to give you a bit of context to that, and I think I told you about this in Huntingdon, you know, it would be closer for me to fly from London to Ukraine as it would be for me to fly from Brisbane to Perth, right? So if you just think about that for a second, that would be like a war raging in Perth and Sydney and Melbourne agents having to hear that and deal with that. So I think that the UK industry have had over the last decade far more external factors, which has built up resilience, which has built up, and I'll tell you one of my favorite stories in a second, but has built up look, you know, what's happening is what's happening. We can't change that. So how do we deal with that? How do we respond to that? Over in Australia, I think the economy tends to be pretty good most of the time. We have our ups, we have our downs, but not as big as you probably have up here. So again, I've got to be careful when I address the Australians because I don't want to fall out with them. But what I want to say to them is, Jesus, guys, if you can't make a good living doing real estate in Australia, you wouldn't stand a chance in the UK.
It's a really interesting point that you make. The AI thing we'll come back to in a second, but about all those external factors. And I think sometimes it takes someone with a bit of global perspective to say that, because I don't know about you, Matt, but I feel like we almost just you have your head down, you get on with it, and you can't see the wood for the trees with that. You just get on with the day to day, and you don't think about the impact that those things have. But what you're saying is right. You do build up resilience, and like right now, we've got I'm dating this podcast. There's a general election going on, and by and large, everyone's just getting on with the day job because that is the least eventful thing that's happened in the last few years. That's barely on the Richter scale for pandemics, wars, everything in between. Sorry, Matt.
No, it's just on this exactly. I had a client the other day talk about the general election. Is that causing a slowdown in the market? I said it's been the least affected thing that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years because we've had this, and this. So the general election, let's be honest, it's not quite as significant as some of the other things that have happened. So, yeah.
But one of my favourite stories, I caught up with, just talking about COVID. So I caught up with Matt Baldock. Do you know Matt?
Yeah.
And Matt Baldock, he said something to me which really resonated. He said, you know, what COVID did was COVID taught us or gave us an opportunity to build really strong relationships with our community, because the communities that he was serving obviously were suffering because of lockdown and everything. And so what he said to me was it gave us as a real estate group an opportunity to say, how do we serve? How do we help? How do we give a leg up to our community and be the center of their world? And I thought that was a great way of looking at COVID. But then he went on to say, and now COVID's finished, I don't want us to go back to the olden days. I don't want us to retreat. I want us to continue to be the center of the community and give a helping hand and ring our tenants and ring our customers to go, are you okay? You know, is everything good? And that led me to a meeting I had with Matt Nichol over in Worcester. And he was saying to me that after COVID, obviously people in the main was strapped for cash. And so he created this garage sale.
Yeah.
And so the garage, he basically said to the community of Worcester and Droitwich and other areas, look, I'll do the marketing, but I'll put the sign outside the door to say that on this day a garage sale is happening here. And the first garage sale was in 2021, and there was X number of streets and X number of properties involved and X number of people. That garage sale now, it happened a couple of weeks ago. I think he was saying to me there were 600 properties on a given day opened up their home with a garage sale. Yeah, there were I'm making this number up, but 180 streets involved. Local radio got involved, local television got involved. Now that's a great example of COVID hit. So let's do something proactive and help our community by giving them opportunity to make some money. But COVID's finished. Let's continue to build on that and make the garage sale as big as possible. That's what I mean by resilience, which is something that I think the Australians can look at and go, that's good. We can probably copy that.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, if anyone wants to listen to that, Matt, that's on Simon Gates Opening the Gates with Matt Nichol. It's a really good piece around that. I really enjoyed the same takeaway there.
Yeah,
because I think you are in the community, and the community are your clients, your prospects, whatever you want to call it. And I think COVID definitely widened a few eyes into how much you can serve people and what it actually does.
Well, you look at these events and my wife often says to me, and I hear her coaching our children, all of whom have grown up now, when things happen, you either look at it and go, things happen to me. So in other words, that happened to me and I'm the victim, or things happen for me. And I love that. And so again, going back to what I said 5 minutes earlier, I think the UK has to deal with more external factors, which means that they have to they have to flex their muscle, they have to build resilience.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that I need to package in a way, not to patronise the Australians and say, let's be grateful for what we've got.
Turn the question around then. What are some of the things that you think the UK agents could learn from Australian agents based on your time there and your experience dealing with arguably some of the best in the industry, but still, what do you think are some missing pieces that we could use to our advantage from what the Australians do?
Well, I think we live in a world now where digital is so important. And so we know that when consumers are looking to choose a hotel, consumers are looking to choose a real estate agent, they're going to go online. And so brands need to look brilliant digitally. They looked at, I call it the digital shop window. Your digital shop window needs to look as though you are one of the best in town. And I think that is something the Australians do very, very well. And we touched on that 15, 20 minutes ago. So, if I was coaching or mentoring a real estate group here in the UK, I would say, every time somebody Googles best real estate agent in Droitwich or best real estate agent in Stamford or Leamington Spa or wherever, make sure that you look $1 million online. And so I think agents generally across the world do a good job in looking good physically. They wear a nice suit, their shoes are clean, they drive a nice car, and that is your sort of offline brand. But your online brand is something that I think in the UK you could probably learn from what the best do in Australia.
Can you go a level deeper with that?
Yep.
So what you're saying makes perfect sense, but what kinds of things are you talking about? Website, videography, review, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, all of those. So one of the things I often talk to agents about is your Netflix trailer. Yeah. So when you think about it, on a Saturday, if you're deciding on what film to watch, you'll flick through Netflix and you'll keep scrolling, and each video cover and the few words of description, you're probably going to give a second, and you're going to make a decision whether or not you're going to keep scrolling or you're going to click and you're going to watch the trailer. Make sense? And I think how consumers search for real estate agents and real estate brands is exactly the same. So real estate agents and real estate brands need to have a Netflix trailer which says to the consumer, stop, look at me in more detail, I'm worth it. So that Netflix trailer needs to stand out. It needs to be different. You need to get away from all the same words that real estate agents use, people friendly, good negotiator. We get all of that, but everybody says that. So you're looking for a statement that stands you out from the crowd. So I think that's important. Reviews are really, really important. And it's not so much about the quantity of reviews, but the date stamp on the reviews. So if I am looking at a restaurant to eat at in Stamford, and the last review was 18 months ago, I'm starting to question, well, what the hell's happened in the last 18 months? Have they had a nosedive? So you've got to have reviews, and they've got to be up to date. And again, you don't need to have hundreds or thousands of them, but you need to have more than 2 or 3. And so a really good friend of mine, a lady called Maz Farrelly, so she was a producer for the BBC, was very heavily involved with shows like Britain's Got Talent. In Australia, we have this dreadful show called Farmer Wants a Wife, and Maz was part of all of that. And
Interesting.
Maz said to me once, which was great, she said, real estate agents need to remember that it's not the job of the consumer to find them interesting. It's not the job of the consumer to find the agent interesting. It's the job of the agent to be interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and so that's really critical when people check you out online.
So they don't just So there's an immediate connection, or credibility, or like you just said, it's the trailer mindset, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And look, there's nothing worse than if you go on a real estate agency's website and links don't work. You click on the link and it doesn't work, or you click on a link and it takes you off into so they're what I call just the bread and butter of getting things. The health checks, getting the basics right.
This is a really silly question. When you say Netflix trailer, do you actually mean a video, or is it a mindset for capturing attention across everything that you do and say online?
So I went on a Simon Ledbetter program up in Lincoln and recently, and he was saying to me that the average resident has probably got in his or her mind or knows of 2 or 3 agents tops. But there's probably 12 or 15 agents that serve
most towns. Yes.
Yeah. And so as an agent, you need to be in that top 2 or 3. You need to be on the radar of the seller. So when the seller one morning says to his wife, I think it's time to sell, then he or she is going to call in you as the agent. So what I encourage Australian real estate agents to do is make sure that your Netflix trailer, it might be a video, it might be just 30 compelling words, makes you memorable, makes you interesting. So if you think about LinkedIn, if you go on to anybody's LinkedIn profile, you've got about 30 words. And those 30 words count.
Well, it's the same with Rightmove. They said, the first 150 characters or something like that on the ad for a property. How important that is. So it's no different. What you're saying is, with a consumer looking around at who's going to be the agent for them.
I'll tell you did I tell you the Uber story?
I don't think so.
You'd remember if I did. So I was very, very fortunate that in its early days, so Uber had probably been around for about 18 months. I went over to San Francisco to their head office with a number of execs from REA and some of our key customers. And we walked into Uber's head office, and we were in reception. The lady comes to say good day and take us out back. And I'm expecting her to say, how was the journey? How's the hotel? How are you finding San Francisco? And she looked at me and she said, what's wrong with you Australians? In a pretty aggressive way. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, you're so impatient. And what she went on to say was, because of technology, they can obviously track the behavior of users of Uber. Makes sense. And Uber at the time were in about 120 countries. And she was saying that the most impatient users of Uber were the Brits and the Australians. And then she went on to demonstrate. She said, so you want in an Uber from Sydney to Parramatta, and you fill in the details, you click on the button, and the Uber is 9 minutes away. And what she was saying is 9 minutes gives a reaction of 9 minutes. I'm not waiting 9 minutes for an Uber. That's ridiculous. Cancel, rebook, hoping another Uber would suddenly appear that was 4 minutes away. The point she was making is, in the olden days, you'd quite happily wait half an hour for a taxi from Sydney to Parramatta, but expectations of consumers have changed, and we want it now, we want it instant. And what she was saying is, to these real estate customers that I was with, these impatient users of our technology, of our service, are your customers. So think about your processes. If they're as slow as they were 3 years ago, you're probably frustrating your users. So if you think of that just in the context of what we've been talking about the last 10 or 15 minutes, people are not going to go online and search for a restaurant or a cafe or a real estate agent and muddle through trying to find what they're wanting. If it's not there, they're going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that immediacy of response is what they're looking at when they look at your shop window, so your website, or it's the speed with which they're responded to when they make an inquiry with you?
I think it's all of that. I think that, I think that as human beings, we've just, and technology has created this. Big companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook have raised the bar, haven't they, as far as speed is concerned. I mean, you order something on Amazon and the next day it's delivered. Yeah, I post something on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, and within seconds, people all around the world can see it. I think technology companies have just raised the bar on what's possible, and so consumers have become spoiled and they expect that. And if I was to ring a real estate agent on a Monday morning and the real estate agent didn't call me back in a few hours, I would find that really sloppy. Now, 10 years ago, that would probably be normal, but that's not normal now.
Can I go back to portals for a second?
Yeah.
Because and maybe pick up on and use that and then pick up on some of the bits that we've talked about since. Because I think you've got quite an interesting insight into that world. Is where do you think it's going? And we've talked about the similarities and differences between the Aussie and the UK portal market, but where do you see that going? And do you think, because there's lots of different opinions about Rightmove, just to use the UK for example, one of their criticism, I think, is that agents would level at them as a bit of a lack of innovation, that the principles of the Rightmove platform really operate very similarly to how they did going back in time. It works and customers like it, and maybe there's not any need for anything more than that as a catalogue for them to browse. Rightmove has tens and tens of millions of hits per month. There's only 1 million transactions a year. It's almost a national pastime. Where do you see the future of the portal market going, and how consumers use them, what they're looking for, and where that might go and how it might affect agents? And do you think that AI has a part to play in that? And if so, how?
Yeah, no, good questions. First thing I would say, probably controversially, is if an agent, and let's go back to the gym analogy, if an agent or agency is using all of the services, so there's not a piece in the gym they're not using, they have every right to say to the gym owner, you need to bring some more gym equipment in. And so I would say, going back to Rightmove, if an agent or agency is using every service that Rightmove brings to the table, then they have every right to say you need to innovate, you need to bring new things. But if an agent or agency is only using 30% of what is currently available, then Rightmove aren't going to spend money, I doubt. Now, I've got no connections, no financial arrangement with Rightmove. I'm just making that point. So I think that agents can sometimes be guilty of blame culture when probably they just need to look in the mirror and ask themselves the hard question: am I making the most of what's on the table right now?
I suppose just on that point very quickly, I suppose the easy defense of Rightmove is if you compare the costs of Rightmove now versus the world that you're in before in terms of print.
Yep.
It all looks very cheap in comparison.
Correct. Absolutely. Where I think portals are going to move, and I think it's pretty scary. So in Australia, in Australia, if you're a homeowner, and there's about 12 million homeowners in Australia, you can claim your property on realestate.com.au. So basically, in basic language, you're saying to realestate.com, I own this house, 3 Smith Street. And realestate.com.au will go, great. In exchange for you telling us a little bit about you and your ownership of the property, we will send you on a regular basis information about 3 Smith Street. So, for example, properties like yours that have just sold, the number of people that are on realestate.com.au searching for properties like yours. So I claimed my property. Now, in fairness to realestate.com, and I left there 4 years ago, I've got no connection with them right now. I really enjoyed the communication that they serve up to me because I find it helpful and useful.
And who wouldn't want to know, right?
And who wouldn't want to know, right? Now, realestate.com.au, out of the 11 million homes, have got close to 4 million that have claimed, right? And they're going to go to 5, they're going to go to 6. Now, they will eventually get to a point where virtually every homeowner would have claimed their property. Now, what does that do? Well, that enables realestate.com.au to have a relationship with me without an agent being involved.
Yeah, you've completely bypassed the agent.
Completely bypassed the agent. And you know, we can spend hours and hours and hours talking about where that would go. So one of the great things about what Matt Nichols doing in Worcestershire, he's building up a relationship with the Worcestershire community by doing his garage sales, right? So even if Rightmove were to apply the same strategy, he's already there. He's built a relationship, because if there were 600 homes that opened their doors to their garage sale, guess who the first 600 people that are going to get called on that Monday? It's going to be those people. So I think that is the way that realestate.com.au is going. Now, the huge cynics, and I don't think this will happen, but the huge cynics will say, maybe one day realestate.com.au will say to all of those people that have claimed their property, would you like to sell your house? If you do, then do it through us and we'll put you in touch with an agent. And so they start then clipping the ticket. No difference to how these aggregators in hotels have gone, where you can book a hotel direct with the hotel, or you can book it through one of these aggregators.
Go to hotel.com or something.
Exactly, and they all take a clip of the ticket. Yeah. So I think that is potentially, it looks to me, that's where Australia could go. What's interesting, just to move on from that, is when I talk to my eldest son, who's 24, so he's gone from flat sharing to flat sharing with a load of students to renting a house and getting a job, and obviously at some point he will become a first-time buyer. And when I talk to him at 25, he'll say to me, I expect real estate portals and technology to understand what my needs are and to serve me up ideas and suggestions. I don't want to be doing what you did, Dad, in the olden days, searching through lists and lists of properties and what have you. And you think to yourself, blimey, imagine what it was like in the newspaper days. But he already is thinking that search, as we know it, is clunky, clumsy, and old-fashioned. So in answer to your question around AI, I think that we'll probably get to a world where technology will know that Oliver Carroll is at this stage in his thinking around property, and they will start targeting him with relevant information. And so this is where real estate agents need to start thinking and need to go to be really relevant and to continue to be value for that 1.5% or 2% commission. So you look at someone like Lisa Novak. So Lisa and Mark in the northern beaches of Sydney, they are so involved with their local community. You know, they every Saturday morning they open up their really sexy real estate office. You've been to it?
Yeah.
They open up their office, free coffee. It doesn't matter if you're buying or selling or not even buying and selling, just grab yourself a coffee on the way to the football game. And you know, they'll go and talk to the local cafe owner and find out his story. They'll go and talk to the local florist and find out about her story. And
such a it's the environment, the energy, and it all aligns with their social media content and their community, and they've really got that right. So, like you say, when that eventual situation happens, they are ahead of.
Well, they're ahead, or at least they're on par.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, you know, where I live, there's probably 20 real estate agent offices, and within those offices, there might be 100 agents that could potentially sell the house that we live in. There's an opportunity for all 100 of them to have an understanding of who I am and what my thinking is and what have you. And if they don't, then realestate.com.au will.
Very good point, well made. That is really interesting.
It is
really,
fascinating,
really
isn't it? Let's get those insights.
Yeah.
And so as you come to the end of the podcast, so what are you doing now and what does the future look like for you? You're a consultant to who exactly, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I left REA just before COVID, and I had a good innings, 10 years at REA, and I took a job in Dubai, again, doing something very similar to what I had done in the UK and in Australia, which was helping a media company in Dubai manage the transition from print to online. And I was there only for 2 or 3 months, and COVID hit, and both the UAE and the Australian government were very hard on locking their borders down. And so I made a decision to go back to Australia and leave the job in Dubai, which was a great shame. And I just set up my own consultancy company. So I spent a lot of time working with agents and offices around building a digital footprint that gets you noticed. And I also spend a lot of time facilitating workshops and facilitating conferences, all to do with real estate. And that's what I do. And as I approach another big birthday that ends in a 0, I think learning and education is really, really important. And so one of the reasons, as I said earlier on, coming over here was to meet new people. Like we didn't know each other.
No, Sam introduced us, didn't he?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that irrespective of whether or not you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you need to continue to network, you need to continue to meet people, you need to continue to learn new stuff.
Yeah.
And seriously, I've got a notepad of learnings that I've picked up from all the meetings I've had since I arrived in April. It's this big, it's this thick. And that makes me a better person, and it keeps you relevant. So that's a really important thing for me. The other thing I do, which I must plug, is once a year I run I think it's probably the largest real estate charity event in Australia. And so I take a bunch of real estate leaders and agents and property managers on a bike ride across Thailand. I'm not a cyclist. I just like doing this sort of stuff. And most of the people who cycle with me are not cyclists. They just want to do something out of the ordinary. And so I'm busy training for this bike ride, which is next February. There's 60 of us from the Australian industry. We've got 3 UK riders next year, which is terrific. And we'll aim to raise in pounds around about £200,000 for a children's charity, on top of the £1 million that we've raised through doing this bike ride over the last 4 or 5 years.
Congratulations, that's incredible.
And what's really interesting about that bike ride is, again, I do it for the obvious reasons, but I also do it because I just like meeting people out of that office environment and learning what their story is. And when you hit that finishing line on day 3 and you've done 100 kilometers and it's bloody hot, you get to know real estate agents and leaders at a different level.
Totally, yeah.
And it just makes you a better consultant, getting that understanding, if that makes sense.
Because it's hard not to have a deeper bond with someone after you've been through something like that, and over a cup of coffee, can't you?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's it's interesting. I'd say to Rightmove, I say to Domain, you spend all this money taking your top customers to the football and to the cricket, and that's great.
Yeah.
But the relationship that you'll build, taking them to the pub and what have you, is always going to be wafer thin. You take some of your customers on a bike ride, and it doesn't matter if it's rugby or cricket. That camaraderie is just really genuine and very special. So so there you go. That's the bike ride.
So there you go. So I often say at this part of the show, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, but it feels especially pertinent after saying such an amazing achievement there.
Yeah.
But we do go from the sublime to the ridiculous. So you're a guest on Property Porn Stars.
Yep.
And I don't know whether you know, but everyone has a porn star name, whether they know it or not.
Yep.
And we're going to find out yours. And we'll see where you sit on the leaderboard, because we do this with every single guest, but we started with ourselves. And right from episode 1, no one's managed to knock Matt off the top spot, which is just infuriating, I have to say.
Yeah.
So your porn star name is comprised of your middle name and your first pet's name.
Yeah.
What do we got?
Middle name, Robert Champ.
Champ.
Bobby Champ.
Bobby Champ.
Bobby Champ.
Robert Champ.
Yeah, that's not bad.
What was Champ?
Champ was a dog.
Are you saying champ or chump?
Champ.
Champ.
As in champion.
You like Champ?
I thought you said chump.
Yeah, Robert Champ.
Steve, it's been brilliant to have you on, and thanks for flying all the way over here, just especially...
I still got the train from Peterborough to King's Cross.
Just make sure you cut the other bits out. But no, it's been great to have you. I found it fascinating. I had obviously heard some of that before, so it was really good for you to meet David and to share with all of our listeners, who I think will take quite a lot of insights away from that.
I think what's nice about talking to you as well is you have a bit of a unique perspective of having one foot in the UK and one in Oz, whereas quite often when we speak to Australian trainers, it's very much, here's what you can learn from the Australian perspective, and you have a different dynamic on that, which I think is really interesting. If anyone's listening to this wants to follow you or connect with you, speak with you, or see what you're doing on socials, where can they find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my preferred, so just check me out on LinkedIn. That's the social media platform I use the most. And of course, if anybody wants to join me on this bike ride, so there's February next year. There's 60 of us. We have 3 riders from the UK. So, but if you can cope with 57 Aussies,
that's the challenge.
Then that's
100k.
That's the challenge. No, we cycle 500 kilometres over 5 days.
Okay,
so 100 kilometres a day.
Yeah.
But I mean, the most important thing is it's not a race.
No.
It's a leisurely cycle, chit-chat. But I tell you what, after 100 Ks, your legs still ache and you're desperate for a beer.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
So follow Steve to find out more about that.
Yep.
And follow Steve to find out about everything else that you're doing as well, which sounds awesome. And good luck and congratulations. And thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of Property Porn Stars. I really hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next episode.
See you soon.